You are standing on a brick. It is not a beautiful brick. There is no inscription on it, no king's name, no god's face, no boast of any kind. It is rectangular, fired hard in a kiln, and it has been holding its shape for 4,500 years. Look up. The street runs away from you in a line so straight it could have been drawn with a ruler, between blank brick walls, toward a horizon of flat rooftops. Under your feet, hidden beneath the paving, water is moving through a covered drain. Now measure the brick. Its thickness, its width, and its length run in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. Walk 400 miles north and dig, and you will find bricks cut to the same proportions. Walk 600 miles east and dig again. The same ratio. Somebody standardized a subcontinent. So here is the question that has troubled archaeologists for 100 years. Who? Because in this city there is no throne room. There is no palace. There is no royal tomb packed with gold, no carving of a conqueror standing on the bodies of his enemies, no monument that says a ruler's name. Not one name of one king has ever been recovered here, or at any of the more than 1,000 settlements that shared this culture. You are standing in one of the largest and most carefully organized cities of the Bronze Age world, and nobody knows who ran it. But the truth is stranger than the legend. Start with the name, because you are already using the wrong one. Mohenjo-Daro is not what its people called it. It is a modern Sindhi phrase, and it means something close to Mound of the Dead. The real name, whatever it was spoken here for 6 centuries and then dropped out of human memory completely. That is the part that should unsettle you. Not that the city fell, cities fall. It is that a civilization spread across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined could vanish so cleanly that 3,000 years later, nobody in the region had any idea it had ever existed. For most of recorded history, no one was looking for it. Then, in the 1860s, workmen laying railway track across the Punjab needed ballast, and they found an inexhaustible supply of hard, perfectly uniform bricks in a nearby mound. They tore up the ancient city of Harappa and laid it under the rails. It took another 60 years for anyone to understand what had been lost. In 1921, the archaeologist Daya Ram Sahni began proper excavations at Harappa. The following year, an officer of the Archaeological Survey of India named Rakhigarhi Banerjee started digging into a mound in Sindh where a Buddhist stupa sat on top of much older brickwork. He kept going down. The brickwork kept going down with him. In September of 1924, the survey's director, John Marshall, announced to the world that an entirely unknown civilization had been found. Overnight, the history of South Asia got 2,000 years older. So what was actually here? Imagine standing in this street at its height, somewhere between 2,600 and 1,900 years before the Common Era. Around you live perhaps 30 to 40,000 people. The city is laid out on a grid, oriented roughly to the compass points, divided into a raised western sector and a sprawling lower town. The houses are plain from the outside. No windows onto the street, no display, no competition. You step through a doorway into a courtyard, and the house opens inward. Rooms around the open square, a staircase to the roof where people sleep in the hot months. And then there is the thing that visitors always underestimate. Almost every house has a bathing floor. A slightly sloped platform of tightly fitted brick, sealed so water runs one way, out through a channel in the wall into a drain in the street, which joins a larger drain, which is covered with stone slabs and fitted with brick-lined pits where solids settle out so the system can be cleaned. There are around 700 wells inside this city. Some houses have their own. Stop and hold that against what you know about the ancient world. In most Bronze Age cities, water infrastructure existed to serve a temple or a palace. Here, it runs to ordinary homes on ordinary streets, and it runs everywhere. There is one great public structure, and it is not a fortress or a shrine to a war god. It is a tank. The Great Bath sits on the raised western sector, about 12 meters long, 7 wide, and 2.5 deep, with brick steps down into it at each end. The builders laid the bricks in gypsum mortar and then sealed the whole basin with a layer of bitumen, natural tar, to make it watertight. They built a swimming pool-sized waterproof basin in the 3rd millennium before the Common Era and put it at the ceremonial heart of the city. Ask yourself what a society values when the grandest thing it builds is clean water. The precision does not stop at the plumbing. In the ruins, excavators keep finding small cubes of grey chert, beautifully cut, in a graded series of sizes. They are weights. Their masses follow a consistent system, doubling upward from a tiny unit of less than a gram, and the same standard turns up hundreds of miles apart. A merchant in one city could weigh goods against a merchant in another, and both would agree on the answer. They were traders, and they went far. Cuneiform tablets from Mesopotamia mention ships arriving from a distant land the Akkadians called Meluha, alongside vessels from Magan and Dilmun. An inscription of Sargon of Akkad, around 2300 before the Common Era, boasts of those ships tied up at his quay. Archaeologists digging in the royal cemetery at Ur have pulled out long carnelian beads etched with white patterns, made with a technique perfected in the Indus. At Lothal, on the Gujarat coast, the archaeologist S. R. Rao uncovered an enormous rectangular brick basin connected to a channel, which he interpreted as a dockyard where boats could be moored. Some specialists argue it was a water reservoir instead. The debate has never fully settled, but nobody disputes that Lothal was a workshop town turning out beads and shell and metal for export. And they wrote, more than 4,000 inscribed objects have been found, square seals of carved steatite, copper tablets, pottery marks. The commonest image on the seals is an animal with a single curved horn, which everyone calls the unicorn, standing in front of an object that might be a manger or an incense burner. Above it runs a line of signs. Nobody can read them. This is the great open wound of Indus archaeology. There are something in the range of 400 distinct signs. The inscriptions are brutally short, most of them under 6 characters, with the longest single-surface text running to about 26. There is no bilingual key, no Rosetta Stone, no later tradition that preserved the language. The Finnish scholar Asko Parpola has spent more than 50 years on the problem, cataloguing every known inscription and arguing that the underlying language belonged to the Dravidian family, whose descendants are still spoken across southern India today. Others disagree entirely. In 2004, Steve Farmer, Richard Sproat, and Michael Witzel published a paper arguing that the sequences are too short and too oddly distributed to be true writing at all, and may instead be a system of non-linguistic symbols, clan marks, tax stamps, religious emblems. Most researchers still think it encodes a language, but the honest answer is that after a century of work, no decipherment has been accepted, and until one is, this civilization stays silent about itself, which brings you to the murder. For decades, everyone knew how Mohenjo-Daro ended. In the 1940s, the formidable British archaeologist Mortimer Wheeler excavated here, and he found human skeletons, sprawled, some in a lane, apparently unburied. He knew that later Sanskrit hymns described a war god, Indra, smashing the walled strongholds of enemies. He put the two together and wrote a sentence that shaped popular history for 2 generations. Indra, he said, stands accused, an invasion, chariots on the horizon, a great city sacked and left for the sand. It is a fantastic story. It also appears to be wrong. In 1964, the American archaeologist George Dales went back through the excavation records and published a paper with a blunt title, The Mythical Massacre at Mohenjo-Daro. The skeletons he showed were not a single event. They came from different parts of the site and different layers of deposit, separated by significant time. Some were in what looked like ordinary burials. The total number was small, a few dozen across decades of digging in a city of tens of thousands. There was no destruction layer, no burnt city, no mass grave, no weapons scattered where they fell. In fact, and this is the part that startles people, the Indus cities are strikingly poor in weaponry compared to their contemporaries. There are copper spearheads and arrowheads, which any farming society would have. What is missing is the rest of it: the swords, the armor, the siege equipment, the triumphal art. In Egypt and Mesopotamia, kings put their violence on the walls. Here, there is almost nothing to put on a wall. The archaeologist Jonathan Mark Canoyer, who has worked at Harappa for decades, has argued that this points to a genuinely different structure of power, authority distributed among merchant and landholding groups rather than concentrated in one divine king. That interpretation is not universally accepted. Others suspect the elite simply expressed status in ways that do not survive, or in ways we are misreading. Even Wheeler's famous granary at Mohenjo-Daro is no longer confidently called a granary because not a single grain was ever found in it. So the twist is this: the most sophisticated urban civilization of its age left behind no evidence of the thing every other ancient civilization advertised. No conquering king, and no conquest to end it. Then how did it end? Slowly. That is the answer that emerged once people stopped looking for a villain. The Indus cities depended on rivers, and the rivers depended on the monsoon. In 2012, a team led by the geologist Liviu Gheosan published a reconstruction of the region's ancient waterways, showing that the Rakhigarhi, a now seasonal river along which enormous numbers of Harappan sites cluster, was fed by monsoon rain rather than Himalayan glaciers. That distinction matters enormously. A glacier-fed river survives a dry century. A rain-fed one does not, and the rain did fail. In 2014, Yama Dixit, David Hodel and Cameron Petrie published results from Kotla Dahar, a lake in Haryana, where the chemistry of tiny fossil shells recorded an abrupt weakening of the summer monsoon around 4,100 years ago, right at the point when the great cities begin to empty. Picture what that actually looks like on the ground. Not fire, not screaming, a season of thin harvests, then another, a neighborhood that goes quiet, drains that stop being maintained because the households that maintained them have gone east toward the Ganges plain where the rain still falls. The archaeology matches that picture. Over the centuries after 1900, before the Common Era, the big cities shrink and fragment while the number of small farming villages to the east actually rises. The standardized weights fall out of use. The long-distance trade with Mesopotamia dries up. The seals stop being made, and with them, the writing disappears, a script abandoned before anyone outside the culture ever learned to read it. At Harappa, later burials of what is called the Cemetery H culture sit directly on the older city, using different pottery, different customs, in the same place, which tells you something important. The people did not evaporate. In 2019, a team including Vasant Shinde, Neeraj Rai, and David Reich published the first genome successfully recovered from a Harappan individual, a woman buried at Rakhigarhi in Haryana, the largest known site of the civilization. Her ancestry showed no trace of the steppe pastoralist lineage that arrives in South Asia later, and it forms a major component of the ancestry carried by people living in the region today. The civilization was not exterminated, it was dispersed, absorbed, and forgotten. Its descendants simply stopped telling the story until the story was gone. Now come back to the present for a moment. There is a good chance that the water leaving your home right now is doing something a Harappan engineer would recognize instantly. Sloped floor, sealed channel, covered drain under a public street, a settling pit so the system can be cleaned instead of replaced. That basic logic was worked out on this ground before the Great Pyramid was finished, and it was worked out for ordinary houses. And there is a second thing worth carrying with you. This was not a civilization killed by an enemy. It was a civilization that organized itself brilliantly around a pattern of rainfall, and then the rainfall changed. Their sanitation was better than medieval Europe's. Their weights were more consistent than anything in Bronze Age Mesopotamia. Their cities were planned to a standard that would not be matched in the region for 2,000 years. None of it mattered when the monsoon moved, so look down again. You are standing on a brick, 1 to 2 to 4. No name on it, no king's face, no god, no boast, just the quiet, unglamorous competence of people who built a world so well ordered that it needed no monuments, and so dependent on the sky that it could not survive one. They left you no story, they left you the brick, and for 4,500 years that has been enough to prove they were here.